Andry, take it away.
All right. Well, thank you so much. And I appreciate everyone being on this call and this webinar. We have it on, if you've got on the Zoom meeting, you should be able to see our slides, and hopefully those are available for you. Tara, should they just text you if they are struggling to see those slides, if they're trying to get on the webinar?
Absolutely. They can text me at 615-419-7587, and I will send them the link to our webinar meeting.
Wonderful. Thank you. Well, Maddie and I are so excited to be on here with everyone and to share this opportunity and this information. And we hope it just provides you with a great background of the science behind the products that Zelise has, and great ways to use this for your patients, clients, and for yourselves. And, this is such a young science in so many ways that it's a great opportunity in my mind for us to learn from each other. And I'm going to ask if you've got questions, if you could kind of store them up, and we'll try to make some time at the end for you to share those with us, and we'll hopefully have some good discussion as well. So what we're going to do this evening is kind of start by talking about the science of endocannabinoids and the endocannabinoid system to explain why we get such health benefits from using CBD and hemp oil-based products for, again, ourselves and our patients, and why they work in such a wide variety of health conditions. I want to say firstly, what we're doing tonight is really geared for practitioners. And one thing to just let everybody who's an ambassador with Zelise, again, kind of a reminder that we need to be really thoughtful about the way we share information in general about supplements. Per the FDA, we are not allowed to promote them as agents that are treating different disease states. That's for medications, that's for drugs. But what we can do is we can talk about the way they support the endocannabinoid system, and we can talk about the way that the endocannabinoid system is involved in so many different health states. So, and also, as we're talking about this as practitioners, this is not necessarily just promotion. This is education among ourselves about the way one of our very important body systems works. So with that said, I want to go ahead and get started, and we're going to begin again by sharing this information on the background and science of endocannabinoids. And then Maddie is going to share with you the presentation that Zelise has, and within that, we'll be doing some of that together and talking about the science of Zelise products. So just a bit about myself, as Tara did a great introduction, but I am a board-certified family practitioner. I teach at the IU School of Medicine here, and I'm also boarded in bariatric medicine, which is the science of obesity management. And I've been on the board of directors of the American Society of Bariatric Physicians, and I'm currently on the board of directors of the American Functional Medicine Association. And I enjoy that because it's an opportunity to really work with other practitioners and thought leaders in different fields. And I've also Maddie and I are Diamond Executive Ambassadors with Zelise. We've got in my mind, a very good story about how we got involved in this, and I certainly would not have were it not for her. But we'll be sharing that with you in just a bit. So what we're going to do here as far as an outline, we're going to talk about the history and the research of cannabis, and as well as the structure and function of the endocannabinoid system. We're going to talk about the way one can be deficient in cannabinoids, just the same way one can be deficient in any other thing you can measure in the body. And we're going to talk about the use of hemp oil and cannabidiol, which is a major component in hemp oil, as, in essence, hormone replacement therapy. Now, what I want to say initially about that is that cannabinoids and our endocannabinoids are hormones. They are not endocrine hormones. They're not hormones that begin in a gland, travel throughout the body. They're paracrine hormones. They're released from tissue. They work in tissue locally, but they also work at distant sites. So as such, they are hormones, and the levels that we make and use, the action from them can be deficient. And looking to things in nature to replace things that we're deficient in is something that humans do and all animals do naturally. The same way that when you got muscle cramps, that bananas and pineapples sound good because you want to get that potassium. And what we believe is that we have grown up with cannabis plants in our environment for so long that we have somewhat adapted to it and it to us. But one thing I want to say first is I love this quote from Machiavelli, that there is nothing more difficult to carry out, nor more doubtful of success, nor more dangerous to handle than to initiate a new order of things. For the reformer has enemies in all those who profit by the old order. And nowhere, I think, is this more true than in many of us who have a big interest in the use of hemp oil and CBD for our patients, because the order that is in place, kind of the big pharma entities, don't really like us cutting into their market share by using something that is relatively cheap and highly available that, frankly, they don't control. So as you run into pressure from either different state agencies or different people or from the media, just know that a lot of people around this are nervous because they do understand that hemp can be such a big player in the health field that you're going to be hearing about it more and more, but we're also going to be getting pressure from a lot of different entities from a lot of different directions. But a little bit about history. So talking about hemp and cannabis in general, cannabis is one of the oldest known cultivated human plants. In fact, there are some who say that it's actually the reason we got in groups bigger than families, because it was such a useful plant. It was useful for food. It was useful for structure. We could take oils from the plant and light lamps with it. We could use it for so many different things that its broad use was something that humanity and civilization could be based on it. We have data for at least 12,000 years that people have farmed this, and there are no more purely wild plants in existence. We have all the plants that are in existence have been somewhat adapted, and we've chosen the elements of that plant that we want. And it has also sort of changed us because, again, that's, hundreds of generations that we have had where we have adapted to this plant in our environment. So in essence, we do have a bit of hard wiring to expect this to be something that we contact throughout our lives. And we have evidence that for at least 6,000 years, we have used extracts from cannabis medicinally. In the United States, cannabis has a rich medical history. Before 1937 and the Marijuana Tax Act, for 60 years running, cannabis was the third leading pharmaceutical prescribed in the United States. And many different pharmaceutical companies had cannabis products, including Park Davis, the Eli Lilly, Pfizer, and as you see here on this screen, good old Uncle Eli Lilly made their own strain of cannabis. It was an indica strain, and they knew even back then that indica had more utility in health conditions than sativa. We now know that that is because indica has more CBD relative to THC, whereas sativa is a more THC containing strain. But back then, they didn't know about THC and CBD. They just knew this worked better. So this indica strain, Cannabis Americana, was used by Lilly for many years. And when the Marijuana Tax Act was passed in 1937, it was there are many stories of what sound like a really big conspiracy against cannabis. But what is clear, there were many entities that really did not like cannabis. But the only person who stood up at the federal hearings around the Marijuana Tax Act was Dr. W.C. Woodward, who was the legal head of the AMA. And when he testified, he actually told them that this pro campaign they had against marijuana, they did not know that they were talking about cannabis. They changed the name. The people who were interested in bringing about prohibition for cannabis knew that they would never get legislation passed if they went after cannabis, because the pharmaceutical industry was well versed in it, knew a lot about it, and had a lot of financial stake in it. So they changed the name and used this very obscure Mexican term for cannabis called marijuana. And that's why we're still using it now, not really understanding that it's somewhat of a pejorative and kind of racially charged term. But that's what we use. But it has they would have never gotten the Marijuana Tax Act passed if they would have not changed the name to marijuana from cannabis, which I think is a very important thing to mention. One thing I want to mention about the cannabinoids, let's talk about naming for a moment. Why do we talk about what is in our body as endocannabinoids? Because it does make it sound like we're talking about elements from the plant that really belong in our body, and that's not exactly true. It's all about naming, the way that things are named. The cannabis plant was named first. When we identified the elements that are within the cannabis plant that work in our body, we call those cannabinoids. When we looked at where in our body those work, we named those cannabinoid receptors. And then we named the things that we make in our body to work on those receptors our endogenous or endocannabinoids. And then factors that come from the plant, the different cannabinoids, the terpenes, and so forth, we refer to those collectively as phytocannabinoids. So if we look at the phytocannabinoids, there are over 100 that we have identified so far. But by far the major players are THC, which is also known as delta-9 THC. And if you're looking at the slide kind of in the upper right, you'll see delta-9 THC. And THC itself does, of course, have some clinical utility. It does have some medical benefits that it can provide. It's a very good antiemetic. It's very good at helping with nausea and vomiting. It has its own significant action at pain receptors. It is also a very good stimulant of appetite, which, of course, if we have patients who are struggling with cancer or cancer therapies or HIV disease, THC can be a wonderful way to help them regain an appetite and help them with any wasting conditions. It's also a very good suppressor of muscle spasms. But by far, the greatest concentration of the health benefits within the compounds of hemp comes from the CBD. CBD we know to be antibacterial. It inhibits cancer cell growth, and we have data to back these up. We've got a long bibliography at the end of these sources. We know it to be neuroprotective. We know that it helps promote bone growth. It actually is active at osteoblasts themselves. They have receptors for cannabinoids, and it causes them to become more active. It also reduces seizures and convulsions. It reduces blood sugar levels. It's fairly intensely, in many patients, insulin sensitizing. It works on the PPAR gamma receptors, just like a pharmaceutical like Actos does. And we have seen many, many patients who have been able to cut back insulin doses, who have found their blood sugar improve. In fact, one of the early patients I ever saw taking any of these products came up and talked to me, and he was given hemp oil extract for his knees for arthritis, but he was a type 2 insulin-dependent diabetic, and when he was given that agent, he came in and his sugars dropped from the mid 200s to about to the mid 90s. And he talked with his endocrinologist, and she didn't believe it, and she had him stop the hemp oil, and his sugars went right back up. Over the next 2 weeks, they started and stopped it, and he, in fact, did lower his insulin dose by about half. And that is not an isolated incident. Since that time, and that was many months ago now, I've seen several patients who have found that because of this action on the PPAR gamma system, as well as CBD's ability to lower cortisol action, it raises our levels of anandamide, and anandamide, which we're going to talk about in more detail here, but anandamide directly lowers cortisol release. So those two mechanisms together make it potentially very helpful for a lot of patients with blood sugar problems. It also reduces function in the immune system. And so it is an immune modulator. It reduces inflammation and does so more potently by about 20-fold than ibuprofen gram per gram. And also does so without the risk of GI bleeding, GI irritation. It doesn't shut down prostaglandins, so you don't get the loss of the protective layer in the GI tract. It also does not have nearly the same risk to any degree for liver and renal dysfunction, and no connection to CV disease like we see with the anti-inflammatories. So we have replaced a great number of NSAIDs with hemp oil extracts for our patients, and we've got data to back up it's incredibly safe and much safer than all those NSAIDs. We lose about 15 to 16,000 patients a year to NSAIDs and GI bleeds. So we don't see any of that risk with this, which is one thing I really like about it. It reduces the risk of artery blockage, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit more detail and its effect on vascular health. It reduces small intestine contractions, which makes it potentially very helpful for IBS, and we'll talk about that in a little more detail as well. It in itself is a pretty good antiemetic. It does relieve pain, it does relieve anxiety, and it slows bacterial growth, not just directly cytal to bacteria, but slows down their ability to divide. And then it does suppress muscle spasms. It's tranquilizing. It can treat skin inflammation like psoriasis. It's also a vasorelaxant. And again, we're going to talk about those in a bit more detail. No discussion about cannabinoids is going to go very far before you have to mention this man. This is Dr. Raphael Mechoulam. He's at Hebrew University in Israel. He's published over 350 papers on cannabinoids, and he was the discoverer of THC, which was found in 1964. He also discovered the first endocannabinoid, which is called AEA, or anandamide, as it's otherwise known, in 1992. And I want you to just compare for a moment, the understanding that we have of this hormone system, which we've known now for about 25 years, and then named our first one just that long ago. Compare that to, say, thyroid, which we've known about for hundreds of years. Compare that to testosterone, which we've also known about for at least 400 years. Then this is something that's absolutely brand new. And though we have a wealth of preclinical data on cannabinoids and on endocannabinoid function in the body, relative to our history that we have of other hormone systems, we are in the absolute infancy stages of understanding this system. So when we talk about the endocannabinoid system, what are we talking about? Well, the endocannabinoid system is basically the body's primary tool of homeostasis. Every body system you can name has some input from the endocannabinoid system. It's considered the largest neurotransmitter system in the whole body, and it is not specific just to us. Actually, all vertebrates have it, and evolutionarily, it's at least 600 million years old. So the primary systems that we have identified and have great studies on to display that use cannabinoids as a primary way of maintaining homeostasis or maintaining balance, firstly, is the nervous system. And where that we really see clinical utility in that is that we can use cannabinoids to help modify pain signals. We can also use it to help modify anxiety. In my office, the first 6 people that I gave it to, as you're gonna find out later, the products that we're using are a water-soluble hemp oil. And what that means is that you can start to get absorption in these agents very, very quickly. We see blood levels starting to come up in patients within just minutes. And the first 6 patients I gave it to felt it before they even left their visit with me. I've arrested panic attacks directly in my office quicker than I have with benzos without any of the sedation that tends to come with it. It's also very helpful for sleep. As many of you know, sleep in our brain works a bit like a pendulum. Through the day, we're up and active and alert and generating the good chemistry that it helps to take us into good, deep stage 3 and 4 sleep, which is our restorative sleep. And then through hopefully a good night's sleep, we're generating the chemistry that helps us be up and awake and alert during the daytime. Well, what the cannabinoids do is help keep that rhythm going. They basically, when you take CBD externally, you are providing a good shove to that pendulum, so that people both get deeper sleep and tend to be more awake, probably because they're getting deeper sleep, but there is direct action on dopamine, extracellular dopamine, with CBD itself. So there is an ability to it to help not only sleep, but attention and wakefulness during the day. We know that the endocannabinoid system is a big-time modulator of our seizure threshold, also neuron growth and repair. So things like chronic traumatic encephalopathy, people that have had severe concussions, great amounts of research being done with the utilization of CBD to help those patients see improvement in those conditions. We also know movement coordination is highly controlled by the endocannabinoid system. Many are the videos that you can see on the internet showing people having very quick improvement with the use of CBD and cannabinoids in Parkinson's disease. There are studies that show the same thing. Most of the studies that you're going to find on cannabinoids in general are typically preclinical. And that's because we simply don't have any players in this market yet that have the funds to do a bunch of multi-center, double-blinded, randomized, placebo-controlled trials. But if we're going to wait on those to get everything that we need for our patients, it's going to be a long time before you have all the data that you need to take care of people effectively. But the data that are out there are over 3,000 medical studies on the use of CBD in a variety of medical conditions, and take from that, whatever your comfort level is at using that information. Again, in the immune system and our levels of inflammation, if I were to walk over here and bang my foot on a wall, then that injured tissue would flood my bloodstream in that tissue with endocannabinoids to cause a recruiting of all the immune system tools that it would need to begin repair. But energy intake and storage also highly controlled by the endocannabinoid system. Your appetite, metabolism, metabolic rates in general take a ton of input from the endocannabinoid system, as well as cell life cycles and apoptosis. As you all know, we remake tons of our tissues and do so at different rates. You get a new layer of rods and cones in your eye every 48 hours. You get basically a new skin every 6 to 8 weeks, a virtually new liver every 8 months. And you have to make new cells as well as get rid of the old ones. Well, the getting rid of the old cells requires pre-programmed cell death. And much of that internal cellular mechanism and rhythm is driven by cannabinoids. And if we are deficient in those, then it becomes more difficult for cells to know when they're supposed to check out. And that can lead to cells hanging around with damaged DNA, and we believe can increase even the risk of developing cancer. From the reproductive system, all of our endocrine hormonal system take input from the endocannabinoid system. The circulatory system, both our blood pressure, pulse rate, are highly controlled by cannabinoids, and again, as well as osteoblast activity and bone development. The net function of most of these is an adaptogenic one, meaning that in general, it will tend to bring in an activity that is a little bit too high, bring it down somewhat, and an activity that's a little too low, and bring it up some, tend to encourage it. And that's why we call it a balancer and an engine of homeostasis, and also a reason that it's very difficult to overdose on something like CBD because it just kind of pulls functions to the middle. But we'll have some data on safety here in just a little bit. The ECS, the endocannabinoid system, is not super complex. It's actually pretty easy to understand. What it is made of is two receptors primarily, CB1 and CB2, two endocannabinoids, anandamide and 2-AG. And this is not precisely true, but you can think of it largely as anandamide being your internal THC and 2-AG is your internal CBD. And then basically one enzyme. There's another enzyme that's pretty important, but the primary one we talk about is fatty acid amide hydrolase. And that enzyme breaks down your endocannabinoids, and especially it breaks down anandamide. And if you have dysfunctional action in this enzyme, particularly if that enzyme is overactive, then you can be deficient in anandamide, and we've got data to back that up as well. So when we talk about the receptors, we have the CB1 receptors, and they are mostly found in the brain and spinal cord, also somewhat in connective tissue and in the endocrine system, but that's where they mostly are located. CB2 receptors are mostly found within the immune system, our spleen, our thymus, tonsils, as well as every white blood cell in the entire body has CB2 receptors. So that is why we see this wide range of activity when people use cannabinoids, and also why something like CBD ends up sounding, frankly, when I first heard about it, sounds like snake oil. You know, how can they do all these different things in all these different systems? Well, if you just look at this and look at the receptors for cannabinoids, hard to think of many systems that are not potentially impacted if these receptors are in fact involved in their physiology. So again, CB1 receptors occur primarily in the central nervous system as well as connective tissue, reproductive organs. CB2 mainly in your immune system. There are other receptors. This GPR55 is a fairly new one that we've identified. It's linked very much to bone development as well as cancer cell growth. And then the TRPV1 or the vanilloid receptors, as well as serotonin, adenosine, GABA, dopamine, adrenergic receptors. All of these can take input from cannabinoids. So while they're not specifically cannabinoid receptors, they are involved in cannabinoid function. So if we graphically, if we look at that here, the cannabinoid receptors, CBD actually is basically an allosteric modulator of many of these other systems, and so they turn down or turn up, typically down, the action of a lot of these other receptor systems. So the opioid system, for example, one of the potential uses of CBD, and one of the things we see clinically, and we have many people who work and do research in rehab, are beginning to look at CBD for the use in addiction, because it does block opioid activity. It can kill someone's high from an opioid, which can help potentially reduce cravings. It also tends to help with many of the withdrawal side effects. In the dopaminergic system, we see CBD helping raising extracellular levels of dopamine, as well as working directly on receptors. So it potentially gives it a use in both, again, addiction medicine. Smoking cessation has been studied significantly with CBD, as well as mood and attention. And then serotonin, of course, for mood, depression, anxiety. We do see CBD interacting with those receptor systems a lot as well. So again, the primary endocannabinoids that we've identified and talk about in the body, the first is anandamide or arachidonyl ethanolamine, and 2-AG, 2-arachidonyl glycerol. And if we look at anandamide itself, its primary functions are those of feeling pleasure in the brain, your ability to enjoy many things. We've ascribed a lot of that activity to dopamine, but there's a tremendous synergy between the actions of dopamine and anandamide, and your ability to develop an appetite, to want to reproduce, your ability to maintain sleep, as well as to relieve your own pain, requires anandamide. And we know from Dr. Blewett's studies that a deficiency in anandamide, if people are low in this, they do see significantly increased levels of anxiety and stress. And that was a fairly recent study just about 3 years ago. It was part of the bridge between the mind and the body. So when we have told people it's really important to keep a positive attitude, it's not just kind of a cool idea, but it actually is really important for things even like overcoming cancer, because we know anandamide does inhibit cancer cell growth, particularly in breast is one of the ones that's been studied in more than others. There are other places to get anandamide. There are significant amounts of anandamide in chocolate. We think that's one reason people really like chocolate as opposed to other sweets sometimes. Oxytocin drives anandamide production, so even orgasm significantly raises anandamide, and that's one reason people feel pleasure from it. It is produced in meditation, yoga. It's also responsible for the runner's high. We used to give that credit to endorphins, but endorphins, it turns out, are too big to cross the blood-brain barrier, so it couldn't have been them. But anandamide, it does get released during significant levels of exercise. The functions of 2-AG, again, are focused more on the CB2 system, so they're related more to immune function. It suppresses inflammation. It is significantly neuroprotective. It's released when there's tissue injury, and it regulates energy balance, suppresses seizures, regulates the vascular system, as well as blood vessel tone. And we know that the actions of 2-AG are blocked in many people with heart disease. So again, the endocannabinoid system is a significant player in even vascular problems. And again, as everybody here knows, heart disease is still our number one killer by far. So great amount of work being done on the utilization and understanding of the endocannabinoid system as it relates to vascular health. And then even those of us who have any bent toward functional medicine or natural medicine will understand that how important probiotics are, how important our gut flora is to maintaining our own body homeostasis and our immune system function. Well, one of the ways that the gut communicates to the brain about that is directly through endocannabinoids. So that's one of the reasons it's important to take probiotics, is to support your own endocannabinoid function. This gentleman is Dr. Ethan Russo, and he's kind of one of the fathers of endocannabinoid medicine. And in 2004, he published a paper where he talked about the definition of a clinical endocannabinoid deficiency syndrome. And he said that this is actually, he believes, and now this has been backed up by many different studies, and this paper was rewritten and published about 4 years ago. And so that the fibromyalgia is now understood as, maybe primarily is not even too strong a word, an endocannabinoid deficiency state. And clinically, what we see is a tremendous response. And those of you who have treated many patients with fibro, you're probably all familiar that about everything works with them for about 2 weeks initially and then quits working. Well, we have seen patients have significant responses to using CBD, but it does tend to be durable. And this may be partly because you also know that any patient with fibromyalgia, if you can get them to sleep better, then they tend to have better function. Well, that's one of the primary things we see that is very reliable with the use of hemp extracts and CBD, is that sleep gets better. And if sleep gets better, you're generating that chemistry you need to modulate your pain signals. And so the symptoms of fibromyalgia often tend to get better. Again, far more reliably than I ever predicted or thought would happen before I used this. IBS, again, the problems with IBS are disordered gut motility, as well as typically far too much communication between the gut and brain, such that people are aware of their gut and its exact state all the time. And both of those things get turned down in the presence of CBD. I've seen scores of patients now who I gave them hemp extracts, hemp oil, for some other condition, and that could be anything from arthritis to pain to anxiety. And what they came back in and told me was how they're no longer taking Miralax, how the constipation got better, how their IBS symptoms are significantly better. I've seen it over and over now. Mood management has been very highly related to cannabinoid deficiency states, as Dr. Blewett's study said already before. We also see many patients, we don't have depression because you have a Prozac deficiency, but it actually can be an endocannabinoid deficiency. And replacing that effectively with a phytocannabinoid like CBD can work for a great many patients. And we've seen a great number of people who have been able to substitute an antidepressant for hemp oil extracts and see a very good clinical utility. Migraines especially. I have many, many clinicians who have tried, who were pretty reluctant to try CBD or hemp oil, but when they actually tried it in migraine patients, they were pretty impressed. And I would say that in my experience, that has been true for Maddie herself. It's been very, very true. It has replaced any triptan use for us, as well as a number of different suppressive medications that we have tried. It's been very, very effective and, again, extremely safe. And so migraine is a very important and effective place for you to potentially try this for patients. So again, how would one become deficient in their own endocannabinoids? And one of the ways is you can have an overactive fatty acid amide hydrolase system so that your anandamide doesn't last near as long as it should. It has a fairly short half-life anyway, about 5 to 10 minutes. But if you have high levels of this FAAH enzyme, then those levels of anandamide can be way too low. We know that this has been studied and found to be true in neuropathic pain as well as Alzheimer's disease. And one of the functions of CBD is to block the action of fatty acid amide hydrolase enzymes, making your levels of anandamide higher in the body and making them last longer. So here, this is graphically. So you have anandamide levels, you have FAAH breaking it down, and when you take CBD, that enzyme is blocked so that the levels of anandamide are higher in the body and it sticks around much longer. Here are just some of the health studies, and again, most of these are preclinical, but some are clinical studies and that have been done on CBD in a variety of health conditions. So we know it to be an analgesic, as I said, a neuroprotective antioxidant. It's an anticonvulsant, an antiemetic, cytotoxic to breast cancer cells, as Dr. Legresti showed in 2006. It antagonizes tumor necrosis factor alpha in rheumatoid arthritis patients, as well as it agonizes the 5-HT1A receptor in the serotonin receptor, which is why it helps with anxiety, as well as helps with depression. It induces apoptosis as well as cutting down angiogenesis in tumor cells and in tumors. And it's known to be an antibacterial, and it's one of the few things we have that's known to be effective against MRSA, with a pretty, as you'll see there, an MIC of about 0.5 to 2. For those of you who don't know, the MIC is a way we sort of measure the ability of a substance to work against the bacteria. And that's a pretty good number. We have very few things that are working great against MRSA in the antibiotic world, so having additional tools there is really helpful. Dr. Johnson showed that cannabinoids often work great in non-opioid response or cancer pain. We know it to be very helpful in reduction of both the development of diabetes as well as hyperglycemia itself, as I mentioned already. We know that it can reduce blood pressure. It's cardioprotective, and it does reduce arrhythmias and the size of infarcts after patients have an MI. And I'll show you a little more data on that in just a moment. It reduces inflammation in patients with ulcerative colitis, improves the function in Alzheimer's disease patients, and very, very importantly, reduces substance abuse behaviors, which Dr. Prudhomme showed in his pretty extensive review paper in 2015. So let's talk a moment about the safety of CBD. The amount of CBD that's actually given in the hemp oils that we give is about 3 to 5 milligrams per dose. But doses up to 1,500 milligrams a day are known to be safe and well tolerated in humans. And as this study showed, CBD administration did not induce side effects across a wide range of dosages, including acute and chronic use, nor did tolerance to CBD develop. And again, that has to do with the way it works at receptors. Being an allosteric modulator and not working directly at the primary active site, you don't have any way to develop tolerance to this, whereas you can with THC. THC does work at the active site, especially at CB1 receptors, so you can get tolerance to THC, but you do not with CBD. Here are 50 studies that together, I know it's hard to read, but basically, if you look at the lower right, you can see no significant side effects, no significant side effects, no significant side effects. And this is shown over and over and over. And my favorite thing about using CBD in my practice is its overwhelming safety. It's very, very difficult to do anything very bad to patients with this. There are two places I would be cautious. One is with there can be some drug interactions potentially. It does potentially affect the cytochrome P450 system. So, and where that's really important is in therapeutic index drugs like chemotherapy agents or anti-epileptic medications. I tell people to be careful, talk to their doctor. So, I also tell them to be careful because it can lower blood pressure somewhat. So if you have patients already who have a really low blood pressure or are taking a fair bit of medications for blood pressure already, you may need to back down on some of those other medicines. But it's known to be very safe. The World Health Organization has come out and said it's an extremely safe agent, has one of the widest therapeutic indexes of any agent that we use in pharmaceutical or the natural supplement world. I would put it up on the order of B12 and vitamin D in terms of safety, maybe even more than vitamin D. So this study from PLOS One, which again is a pretty good journal, from Dr. DeFilippis, showed that a reduction in the activated macrophages in biopsied bowel from IBD patients, reduced tumor necrosis alpha and captase 3 levels, as well as reduced lipopolysaccharide levels. Lipopolysaccharide, as you know, is a potent systemic inflammatory agent, and anything that we can do to reduce that will tend to lead to reduced systemic inflammation and improved health. Dr. Durst showed that he took animals where they induced heart attacks, and when they induced these, half of those animals they did it with CBD present in their system, and half were placebo. and you don't do placebo in animal trials. You just didn't give them the medicine. But they found that at sacrifice that the infarct size was reduced by 66% in those animals that were given CBD. The CBD modified and tuned down the immune response to that acute injury. And as you know, the scarring that follows a heart attack is often more damaging to the heart muscle than the infarct itself. So this is, again, clear evidence that we have and support for the idea that CBD does help modify immune response to injury and infection. So the work on this metabolism, as I mentioned, this does work on the PPAR system of receptors, especially PPAR gamma as relates to diabetes management. So it's very insulin sensitizing for many patients. It does work on PPAR alpha, which is involved in cholesterol metabolism. And so those are two potential places to see CBD be very useful for patients. And many of my diabetic patients, we are using this, especially if we're struggling at glucose control, or if they have some limitation in what they can either get financially in medication, or I would much prefer trying this to a sulfonylurea for my patients for if I need additional glucose control. And again, its safety makes that a very, very reasonable thing to do. Many patients I have with diabetes, I actually gave it to them for something like, say, diabetic neuropathy as an alternative to maybe gabapentin or Lyrica. But in doing so, with many of those patients we saw, and there are a number of reports of people seeing glucose management and glucose levels being improved in those patients. So further actions, as I mentioned, it works on the vanilloid receptors, which is basically where capsaicin works, but does so without a lot of the noxious effects that you can get with taking doses of capsaicin. It also reduces the inflammation-induced hyperalgesia that comes from injury. And then again, sleep-wake cycling. We know that you can increase extracellular dopamine levels by taking CBD, which promotes wakefulness. And doctors, and this was an actual clinical trial, Dr. Carlini and his group showed that versus placebo, very good sleep promotion with this agent. Clinically, in our practice, what this means is that we're using far fewer benzodiazepines. We've replaced a lot of different Ambien prescriptions with this, and it's not working for every patient, but it's working for a whole lot of them very, very well. One of the things to say, too, again, to kind of differentiate CBD from THC, this is a study from, again, a very good journal, European Journal of Preventive Cardiology, just this last fall, which showed that patients who were long-term chronic smokers of marijuana actually had threefold increase in dying from hypertensive-related illness than those that were not. And why is this? Because we know THC is basically a stimulant. It does increase blood pressure, it increases oxygen demand at tissue, it increases sympathetic nervous tone. And over the long run, this isn't particularly healthy necessarily. Whereas CBD itself is known to reduce blood pressure by about 6 millimeters of mercury. And it tends to reduce blood pressure that occurs in response to stress. So for those patients that we have, who just say, oh, doc, my blood pressure is just up because I'm in the office. They have the so-called white coat syndrome. Well, I always wonder, what about, do they have traffic syndrome, or a bad call from the boss syndrome? Then that may be someone that if you give them a generalized antihypertensive, are you going to make them too low at other times? But the ability to keep them from getting high in response to stress may be a potential role for CBD. So what does one want to look for if you're looking for a product to get cannabinoids and phytocannabinoids in their patient? Well, I think one of the most important things is to try to get a water-soluble product. As you know, most oil-based things, such as CoQ10, vitamin D, and so forth, are not very well absorbed. Most CBD oil that's out there on the market has about a 6 to 10% absorption rate. And you have to wait until it gets into the small bowel, binds bile, and which turns it water-soluble so it can be absorbed. If you use a water-soluble hemp oil, then it has the ones that we're using has about 85% absorption, and it takes that onset of action from about 1 to 2 hours to about 5 to 15 minutes. And I can back that up clinically with hundreds of patients we've now used it for. And another thing that's very important, and I want to mention, is I think it's very important to talk about and to use potentially full spectrum hemp oils as opposed to CBD isolate oils. The problem with the CBD isolates is that there's a great amount of synergy you have with the other compounds that are within hemp that can work even at the receptor site. All the terpenes that we know of and all the major players in the terpene world actually have synergy at cannabinoid receptors. So they back up and they potentiate a lot of the actions we want from these anyway. And the CBD isolates have a narrower spectrum of ways they can work. We have dozens of practitioners who are in this business with us who've said they've tried CBD after CBD, and really didn't see a lot of clinical use. But when they switched to these water-soluble full-spectrum hemp oils, found they worked great. We call there are those who say the entourage effect just applies to THC versus CBD, but that's not really true. The entourage effect just refers to all of the cannabinoids that are present and how they have potentially a greater clinical effect than any one of those isolates do at the same time. And that's good news when we talk about the pharmaceutical world, because there is a company, GW Pharmaceuticals, that has Epidiolex. They have a NDA for that, for CBD, and they're under trials right now. But what we see is they crank the doses of that single cannabinoid up to a great amount. They lose the synergy of the other ones. And anytime you take one agent out and pull it out and crank up the dose, you have a greater tendency for side effects or adverse events, where you don't see that at low doses that are used. Nature's just smarter than us. So using the whole plant does tend to be both safer and allows you to keep doses lower and benefit from the synergy of the different compounds that work together. So you do have dozens of terpenes, flavonoids, which of course are potent antioxidants, very good omega fatty acids, alpha-linoleic acid, very good mix of different vitamins and minerals that are also present within hemp oil. This is a page that describes the different terpenes and the synergy that they have with the cannabinoids. So limonene, which is what gives a lot of citrus, its flavor and smell. Terpenes are basically what make essential oils. They're aromatic compounds. They penetrate tissue easily. Alpha-pinene, both of these have a lot of synergy with CBD. Beta-myrcene, which is what gives people who are marijuana smokers kind of that couch lock. They don't want to get up. It's not THC action, it's myrcene action. But it also has synergy with different cannabinoids. Linalool, which is in lavender. Beta-caryophyllene, which is also in black pepper. But all of these work together when you're taking a full plant compound, and you're getting more than the sum of the parts. These are two pages from Ultracell, which is the full spectrum hemp oil that we are using for our patients. It's water soluble, and these are third-party ISO certified certificates of analysis on the product, demonstrating that there is less than 0.00% THC, that there is no significant toxicities that are in these. Hemp is a very efficient plant. It will pull whatever's in the soil, and it's very important that this is from an organic source. So it's much, much safer than a lot of the products that are out there. And that is it. The rest of my bibliography that you can, if you're getting this recording, can take a look at there. And then my final slide with the Dalai Lama, because we love him here in Bloomington. So I'm going to pull up right now our business presentation. And I'm going to have Miss Maddie come and join me. Maddie is my fiance, and Stephen always says that she is proof that I am a good salesman. And I want her to come on and share with you, our experience and our journey in getting involved with Solis, and the opportunity that there is to make a financial change in your life as well as one for your health.
Thank you very much. I wanted to tell Dr. Andry he did an amazing job. As he said, I am his fiance, so I might be a little biased, guys. So let me tell you a little bit about myself while Dr. Andry's getting this presentation pulled up for us. My name is Maddie. I've been a nurse for 20 years. I absolutely love patient care. I know that I've been a healer my entire life. My nursing career actually kind of led me on the path of becoming a life coach, because I realized, as being a nurse, most of the work that I did was helping people either get through their illness or get through some kind of trauma that they've been through. It was just a lot of, support and guidance, and more type just helping people get through whatever medical condition or whatever emotional trauma. So it was more like a counseling, and that was the thing that I really, really enjoyed most. So that's where my life kind of led me to being a life coach. I'm also a certified Reiki master and a certified yoga instructor. And I've always had a desire in my life to really do something that makes a difference for people as often as I can. So when the company Solis came my way, I was actually with one of my yogi sisters, and she told me about this hemp oil product. And the second that I touched the hemp oil, I just knew that there was something really, really important about this. And then I went to a meeting and I found out more about what Solis is. So the name Solis is actually the combination of Swahili words put together that means to multiply nutrition. And that's why Zalise is considered the pay it forward company. And when I heard about that and kind of figured out what that meant, which I'll go into a little bit more detail about that, that moved me with just who I am as a person. And the team that we've been building, a lot of us share that in common, with just this drive to help support our communities and the world as much as we possibly can. So the company, Zalise, was founded in 2015. It was founded by our CEO, Stephen Thompson, and his wife, Angie Thompson, our COO. And they also partnered up with Dr. De Silva, who's a medical doctor. He's in New Jersey, and he is our chief medical officer. So the company has just grown really, really quickly. Stephen and Angie together, they have over 20 years of experience in this industry, and they were actually voted number 40 out of 100,000 mentors in this industry. And they're absolutely amazing. Stephen is hands-on. He will do these tours. He was just in our area, the Midwest. He's going to Oklahoma next week, and he'll be there for 3 or 5 days. And then I think the following week he's going to be in Kentucky. And he really just gets out there because he's so passionate about this. And Stephen has tons of experience with nutraceuticals and in the supplement world. And he was actually working with another company when he went to Haiti with Dr. De Silva. And for the first time in his life, he actually saw what malnourishment could do to young children. Just the children dying by the age of 5 of congestive heart failure, blindness, loss of mobility, and this is irreversible. And Stephen was utterly moved. And at that point, he's really, really good friends with the founder of Tom's Shoes. So I'm sure most of us are familiar with the buy one, give one philosophy behind Tom's Shoes. So he reached out to his friend and asked him, on a business standpoint, how do you make this work? And he did that, and he listened, and he took notes. And what he wanted to do was take the billion-dollar industry that supplements and nutraceuticals are and try to match that to help these children in Haiti. And he came up with a business plan, went back to his partners with the company he was currently working with, and they didn't want to do it. So he talked to Dr. De Silva, and he talked to Angie, and they quit. And that's where Zalise came from. So the whole concept of Zalise was founded on just that paying it forward for malnourished children. So a little bit about Dr. De Silva. Dr. De Silva has been featured on NBC, ABC, CNN. He's kind of the go-to guy. We kind of joke with him a little bit because he was just on the Housewife of New Jersey, which if you guys ever get to meet Dr. De Silva, we'll have to have him tell that story because it's pretty funny. He was the founder and president of the American Nutraceutical Association, and he also founded a functional medicine hospital in New Jersey, and I believe that was the first one. Yeah, the first one in our nation was in New Jersey and was founded by Dr. De Silva. He is also kind of an educator for most medical doctors. He educates medical doctors all over the world, and that's just something that he really, really enjoys doing. And on top of everything that he does do, he still continues to see patients about 3 days a week. So a little bit about Zalise here. So Zalise is kind of what the platform really is to become a wholesale company for health and beauty products and cleaning products. Is basically the top of the top. Dr. De Silva probably rejects about 90% of the products that come to him. But the really amazing thing is Dr. De Silva has handpicked and vetted with his team at Zalise all of the products that we have. We have vitamins, supplements, essential oils, herbal nutrition, bath and beauty, home cleaning, pet nutrition, skincare, anti-aging, fitness, weight loss, organic tanning, and we also have our 2 full-spectrum water-soluble hemp oils. And so what our real goal here at Zalise is to become, just that Amazon of health and wellness, the place that people will go to make sure that they're getting products that they know have been vetted and what the bottle says is in it is actually in it, because that's what Dr. De Silva spends his time doing. So this slide that you guys are looking at here, Matt really went over this really, really well. One thing that I absolutely love about the endocannabinoid system, if you guys just look at the image, Matt talks about people thinking that this is a snake oil, but if you look at the image and you can see all of the different systems in our body that the endocannabinoid system really affects, then that will explain so much. And I know one of the things that we see a lot is somebody will start taking it for one reason and come back, and then all of a sudden they're sleeping better or their pain is less. Maybe people suffer from, some nervousness, and that's why they started taking it. And then all of a sudden, just their life gets better. Overall, what we hear from people is just an overall increased quality of life. And to me, a lot of people will come up to me and say, "Thank you for giving me hope back," or "Thank you for giving me my spouse back," because of what we're doing. And that's, to me, we talk about the system and the science behind it, but this company and this product is driven by the heart, which just really absolutely inspires me. I'm going to go ahead and skip this one. I feel like we covered this one pretty well. And what I'm going to do here is let Matt tell you guys just a little bit about the Ultracell product that we have.
All right. Well, thank you, dear. Awesome job, as always. So the Ultracell product is Zalisa's own proprietary technology and formulation of a full-spectrum hemp oil that is water-soluble. And this product is 100% USDA certified organic, which means both the plant and the ground they're grown on are certified. And I would really encourage people to never, ever, ever take a concentrated oil product from a non-organic plant source, because you have a very high chance of concentrating things in that you don't want, like organophosphate, pesticides, and so forth. So that organic formulation is really important to me. I also love the fact that the technology we have makes it water soluble. It's a combination of both a myceliation and liposomal form. So basically, you break the elements of the hemp oil up into tiny little spheres that make it very easy to absorb through a water soluble source location like a mucous membrane. And that is what imparts its ability to get into your system at a very high absorption rate, as well as have that very quick onset of action. Some of the other things I think are really important about Ultracell. Zalisa's other hemp oil product, the Pure 7, which is a brand partner with us, it's a great hemp oil. We use it a great deal still in our patients and intend to continue to do so. But it uses xylitol as a sweetener. And for those who intend to use this for animals, even though this exact product has not been specifically studied in animals, animals do have an endocannabinoid system, and many people want to use that for their pets and other animals especially. But xylitol is problematic in many of those species. Xylitol can cause an irreversible and even fatal hypoglycemia. So xylitol is not a great idea, especially for dogs. And I love that. I also like the fact that we don't use sodium benzoate as a preservative. When you have that in any agent that has any acidity at all, even like vitamin C, then you talk about the potential of forming benzene, which is a known carcinogen. And for many clinicians, especially who deal a lot in the natural world, that can be a deal breaker. So this has no sodium benzoate as a preservative and no xylitol. And those two things together make it absolutely excellent and very safe for more patients than a lot of the other ones that are in the marketplace would be. So one of the other things that I really appreciate about this company is that they will put their money where their mouth is in terms of doing research. So one of the first studies done was on some of Dr. De Silva's own patients, and they did an absorption study, and they found that at 45 minutes, which is the first moment at which they checked, and in the future, I'm actually campaigning that we do some studies where we go much shorter time frames, like 2.5, 5, and 10 minutes. But by 45 minutes, basically everybody achieved pretty much their max absorption. It was very consistent among the patients that they did this with. So in my mind, that correlates pretty well to what we have seen clinically, where people do get a very rapid onset. It works well. It's going to stay up in the serum a very long time because CBD itself has a long half-life. And if that's what you're measuring, the oral half-life of CBD is about 2 to 3 days. So you're going to have a very long exposure of tissues to this by taking an oral formulation. People might ask, well, if it lasts that long, then why does anybody ever have to take this, twice a day or something? Well, you got to remember, this is a full spectrum hemp oil. So all of the terpenes, all of the other cannabinoids might have a very different time course of first phase metabolism, and they might go away much quicker. So we have many patients who take this, especially for pain, BID, sometimes even TID. But for most patients, I'm dosing it once a day at night, and it's working great. But that very high absorption also allows an affordable amount to be used. Organic hemp oil is a commodity and an expensive one. And if you're going to waste 90% of it because it's not absorbed, it's not a very efficient thing for our clients, our patients, and our customers. So I love the fact that we use a water-soluble one that makes an efficient and affordable formulation for people.